Okay, so since I have kind of a smaller screen on here, I've actually created two screen arrangement presets that I switch back and forth between. So the way you can do that is once you kind of arrange your layout the way you want it, like you notice I have everything collapsed pretty much, then you go into Window and then go down to Workspace and then choose New Workspace and it'll save that arrangement. So I have two custom ones. I have Animation Tall and Animation Wide. And the tall one is when I have a lot of different layers I'm working with and I need to have those stacked up vertically. I will use that. And then for the wide version, that's if I only have maybe one layer but I want to be able to see more of the screen. I can have it arranged this way. So let's see. So this is the scene 3 where the smooth cruiser is taken off and then he's talking here. And so kind of by scene 3 I got a lot better hang of the animation. So I'll just show you how I've arranged all of my layers here. As you can see, I have different folders and subfolders. So if you break it all down into the main folders, I have one folder that I use just for timing. So if we break that down, we've got the soundtrack, and so that's where I've actually dropped the entire dialogue track and everything on that one layer. And then below that I have frames. And so what I've done there is I'll be scrubbing the audio back and forth, and as I'm doing that I'll get to a certain point where I think it needs to break, like maybe we need to switch cameras or the character needs to do a new pose, and I'll just go and set keyframes there. So this is at the very beginning stage where I'm just kind of setting up the basic timing of the shots. So then above that I've got the background layer, and so that's made up of the hospital and the sliding door and the haze. So the haze is from when at the beginning when the cruiser is driving off, we have this kind of gray haze, and so that's just that's a symbol, and I just set the opacity and had that fade out over time. And then we've got the, oops, let's see here. Actually, I guess I have multiple layers of haze. And then we've got the door, which is in the back, and that slides open and shut, and then we've got the actual hospital here. And then next I have a folder for each of the characters. So for this one, this is the old man that comes out who's on the stretcher. Actually, I guess I'll start with Smooth Cat since he's moving. So here's Smooth Cat's folder. So as you can see, there's a lot of layers and keyframes. So what I do first is, based on the soundtrack, I kind of imagine what gestures he's going to be making first, because like I was saying earlier, since there's no parenting, I can't like move the head around and all of his facial features will follow the head, or I can't move the body around and the head will follow. Everything is independent, so I have to kind of think in terms of, alright, how's his body going to move first? I set those keyframes, and then how's his arms going to move? I set those keyframes, and then I save the facial animation for the very last step. So as you see here, I'm using a lot of classic tweens, and that's what the purple here is. And I know I showed you guys, we did shape tweens, motion tweens, and classic tweens. And I've kind of found that for this type of animation, classic tween is the best. And the reason for that is when we're doing facial animation or like speech, we have to swap out the symbols. It's actually, you can't really do that with motion tweens. So you can't swap symbols during a kind of a tween period. So That's why we kind of have to do that. So I guess what I can do is I can take Smooth Cat and I'll just kind of, I'll do like maybe a quick 3-second animation with Smooth Cat based on these layers that I have. So I'll start where he's kind of in a neutral pose like this. Oops. And alright, so here's Smooth Cat by himself. And the way I was able to isolate him was it's just the same as Photoshop. If you hold down the Option key, or the Option key, and you click on the eyeball next to the layer you want to be visible, it's going to hide everything else except that layer. So that's what I did with this folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all these frames, or all these layers rather, and that's made up of glasses, eyes, mouth, nose, head, arm, L, and that actually should probably not be part of the head group. And then shirt, torso, leg R, leg L, and then arm L. So one of those, this one should actually be arm R. Alright, so I'm going to select all these. I'm just going to right click and choose copy frames. And with the difference between that and just a regular copy is if I just do copy and then I later paste it, it's going to paste them all onto the same layer. Whereas if I do copy frames, it's going to save all of these layers. So I'm going to fast forward to, let's see, I guess the next dialogue. Let's see here. My volume's turned off. Okay. So this is the very last part where he's like,
that's a misconception.
Alright, that's a misconception. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the audio out further so I can animate the next line. So to extend a layer in Flash, you just click where you want to extend it to, right click, and choose Insert Frame. Or what I like to do is assign keyframes to all, or keyboard shortcuts to all these. That really speeds up the process. Oh, okay, there it goes. All right, so now I've got this next audio clip.
Statistically, if you all smoked, statistically.
So what I like to do is, well, first I'll paste the frames first, and then I'll kind of talk about the animation. So what I want to do is just highlight where I'm going to paste it into. So just click and drag, right click, and paste frames. So now I've got Smooth Cat up at this point. And so now what I want to do is extend him out to that last frame of the audio. So I'm just going to highlight all those frames, right click, and choose Insert Frame. So, and I'm actually going to switch to my other layout. So, because Smooth Cat's taller, and then I also have all these layers to work with. So that's when I switch to Animation Tall. And now I'm just going to extend the timeline out. So now I can zoom in a little bit more. Maybe set it to like 60. Alright, so now I have all my layers and he's ready to go. So what I like to do is I kind of listen to the audio, and I listen to where he has like a really dynamic voice, and so he has a lot of inflection. So I listen to those kind of peaks and those pauses and stuff like that, and I kind of imagine how would I be posed if I was like really animated. So So he's really, when he says statistically, his voice goes up there, so I'm going to set a key pose right there. So let me so that's the frame where he's saying statistically. So I'm going to highlight all these frames. I'm going to right click and I'm going to, you can either insert keyframe or you can do convert to keyframe. So either way is fine. I'll just convert it. And by the time he says the end of the word statistically, his voice goes back down, so that's going to be another key pose. So at that point, I'm going to mark it by adding some more keyframes. So insert keyframe. So now his voice is really low. So that's going to be another pose. So starting with the word if, right click, convert to keyframe, and then the next word where he kind of emphasizes is the word all. So and that's where his voice kind of goes up as he says it. So if you all, it doesn't start up high, it goes low and goes to high. So at the beginning of all, I'm going to mark a keyframe. And then at the end, at the top, I'm going to mark another keyframe. And then the next word is smoke. So all right. Okay, so now that I have those keyframes marked, I'm actually going to pose him in those frames. So when he's like statistically, I imagine his arms would be a little higher. So I'm going to grab the arm and press Q, and that's going to put it in the transform mode. The other thing is, I've set the pivot points at where the joints are going to be moving. So the way you do that is, if you press Q and then you select an object, you're going to see a white circle somewhere on him. And so you can just click and drag that to wherever you plan on having him pivot from. So in the arms, he's going to be pivoting at the shoulder. So I'm going to have him rotate his arms. You also notice his arm gets a little cut off there, so I'm just going to push it back a bit. And then this arm, I actually want it to bend a little bit. So now I'm going to show you guys how you can actually swap out your different components with different frames. So if I double click on this, this is actually its own timeline, and so I have all these different poses for his arm. And you notice he incrementally bends his arm more for each of those. So I want him to be bent about that far, so that's frame 2. And it'll tell you what frame it is right here. So if we go back here, I click on his arm, and down here we've got this. Oh, by the way, all these I have set to graphics, so not movie clips, but actual graphics. And this is, I guess, with Flash, this is the only way you can do it, is by setting them to graphics. So for looping, which is under here, you have to set the option to single frame, and then you have to tell it to what frame to go to. So I want it to go to frame 2, hit enter, and now his arm is bent to frame 2. Alright, so the next thing is, I want his head to kind of bend back a little bit. So statistically, his head is bending back. So since there's no parenting in Flash, I actually have to select all these components together. And since it accidentally selected the body, I have to hold down Shift, click that, and now I rotate his whole head. Okay, so that's the next key pose. Okay, so now when his voice gets low, I'm going to have his head come forward. And then also in Flash you can kind of have it bend like this. So I'm just going to have it come forward a little bit. I'm going to grab his arm, move that forward. I'm going to have it bend again. In fact, I'm going to have this arm bend as well. And since both of these arms are instances of the same symbol, I have the frames set up the same way. The other thing is I have his shirt set up on its own layer, so I can actually move that forward a little bit to give the illusion that he's turning his body. And then his butt is a little bit off, so I'm just going to grab his whole body and move that forward a little bit. So I'd say 3 poses is good enough for now. And so one thing you want to do with Flash is make the transitions kind of quick. Just because that's kind of how traditional animation is done. If it's not like Disney animation, like Disney, they draw a new frame for every single frame, or they have a entire new character drawing for every single frame. Most other animation studios are only going to draw images for the key poses, so, and then just maybe a couple transitional poses. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark a keyframe just a few frames right before he changes poses. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all those frames there between those 2 keyframes, right click, and create classic tween. And that actually messed him up. I think that will often happen if you move your pivot points. So I'm actually going to skip to the next key pose since the pivot points were already set. Insert keyframe, and then create classic tween. And it's doing it again, dang it. Okay, so what I have to do is just make sure that, I think the body is where the pivot point got changed. Alright, so you notice on his body the pivot point's down here on that frame. It's up here for this frame, so I'm just going to move it down there. And then same for this pose. And it's thinking again. While it's loading, any questions or thoughts up to this point? It's a lot of work, isn't it? It's crazy. It really gives me a much more appreciation for Flash animators. Alright, so I'm going to move that back down. Hopefully it's not messed up. There it goes. Okay, so it kind of fixed itself. So now I've got these transitions here. Now,
statistically, if you all...
We've got that, and so I'm not going to put a whole lot of time into fine-tuning that, but then the last step is to animate the mouth. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the mouth. So this is my mouth layer here, and I'm going to set keyframes for every single syllable of his speech. So when we've got the S noise, I'm going to create a keyframe there. And then there's actually a nice plugin that I found where you can actually load all the frames for that particular movie clip instead of having to go in every time choosing a frame number or like finding out what frame the certain mouth is on and then going back and typing in the number. There's this plugin I found which was like 30 bucks, which lets you just automatically click on the mouth that you want. So I use this mouth for the S noise. The other thing I'll do is I'll zoom into his face. So here his mouth is being more vocal, so I'm going to switch that to an open mouth. So he's back to an S noise here, so I'm going to hit Command S. Well, that's the keyframe or the hotkey I've set it to. I'm going to create another, switch it back to the S. And then kind of maybe a transitional smaller. And that's the basic process. Now, there are parts where I have him turn his head slightly, so I'll show you how I do that as well. So with both his head and his glasses, I have different views. So if I double click on the head, I've got the frontal view, I've got a 3/4 view. I thought I had a full side view. I guess I didn't. And then same with the glasses. I've got frontal glasses and then side glasses. So let's say I want him to turn to the front. So for this frame, I know that he's frontal on frame 1 for both of these, so I'm just going to enter in 1 down here. And so now I just have to move his other facial features to match. And that's kind of how you do a body turn. But yeah, that's basically it. So if you're importing it from Illustrator, I guess I can go through that process as well. The way you can do that is just basically go in, grab everything in Illustrator and copy it, and then go right back into Flash and just paste it in there. And then once you paste all those parts, you have to select every single part and convert it to a symbol. And be sure to name them properly. And then the other thing is, when you're creating all these symbols, it's going to throw them all into this library here. And so since there can get to be a lot of different parts, I've created folders there as well. So the way you do folders in the library is down here at the bottom, there's a little folders icon. And then to create folders in the timeline, there's just a little folder icon here. So that can help keep things a little bit more manageable. And one other thing my cousin told me was that it's typical for professional animation studios for it to take one full 8-hour day to do 10 seconds of animation. So it's a lot of work. Okay, any questions? All right, I'll go ahead and post this.